Aristotle once wrote that teaching is the highest form of understanding. Think about that for a second. What do you imagine that Aristotle had in mind? Is it easier for you to go out and make an A on a test? Or is it easier for you to teach others the material that would allow them to make an A on a test? Well, I think if you've had any experience teaching, you'll understand that being a teacher requires you to understand material at a much deeper level than you would be called upon to demonstrate in any kind of an assessment. It is indeed a much deeper form of understanding. Well, today we want to consider different aspects of education. I think a lot of us, when we think about getting into the field of teaching, imagine a regular classroom, but there are different aspects of classrooms in America. They can look very different depending upon the age of the child, where the class is located. And so today we want to consider different aspects of education. There are different kinds of kids, and they come to school from different kinds of settings. There are also different sorts of motivations that people have for wanting to become a teacher. There are certain motivations that we call intrinsic rewards, such as the desire to help others, a natural feeling that a lot of people have. A love of learning. Folks who really enjoy digging into subjects and learning new things are very often well suited to become teachers. And the desire to work with young people can be a big motivator. You're probably not going to end up on a Wheaties box, but there are some extrinsic rewards for people choosing teaching as well. I think most people find the life of an educator to be a pretty good lifestyle. Despite what you may think from hearing stories in the media, teachers really do they command a pretty good amount of community respect. You'll be surprised the number of parents that will come and talk to you as a teacher because they believe you're an expert and can give them some ideas and suggestions on how to do a better job rearing their child in their own home. So you'll become a person who's seen as knowledgeable and one that others turn to. There's also a good amount of job security if you're an effective teacher, and many people go on to lead happy, productive careers that go on for decades. And you can't discount the school calendar. It is very conducive for people that want to focus on their families, for example, with the summer calendar that allows for parents to spend more time with their children. So what is a teacher? Well, a teacher is certainly an instructor, but a teacher is really a lot of things. We're social workers, nurses, counselors, performers, coaches, politicians, we're lawyers. One minute we're wiping noses and the next minute we're having a deep conversation with a parent about indications of how their child's performing in school. A teacher is indeed many things. What qualities do teachers have that allow them to be successful in different settings? We don't think about this a whole lot because teachers tend to perform the same kinds of duties, but where you are matters. If you're teaching in a rural area, you're going to have some understanding of the expectations of the community for its teachers. And teachers who do well in that setting are those that understand the community, and they share those values of the community they serve. By the same token, if you were in an urban environment, the community would have different standards probably and different sorts of expectations for teachers, but it's every bit as important to match those expectations. So the trick is finding a good fit between your own personality, your passions and skills, and the place that you would like to teach. One of the things we focus on in EDF 103 and CED 100 are the various levels of education, and we're going to be looking at 4 of them during the course. We won't spend time on higher education, but we will spend time, and you will conduct walkthroughs where you'll do professional observations of teaching in 4 different areas: the preschool or early primary, elementary or intermediate grades, typically defined as 4th and 5th grade, the middle grades, somewhere between 5th and 8th grade, and high school. And as you observe these different settings, you're going to find out the obvious things about the different developmental levels of the children. So your personality and finding a fit that allows you to work with the right set of kids is very important. We also have teachers who have different kinds of affinity toward working with certain kids. Some teachers like to challenge themselves and work with the highest performing students they can find. Other teachers similarly like to challenge themselves by working with those students from more modest economic circumstances, where they feel like they are needed the most. And so each of us kind of respond to this in different ways. And keep in mind, there are different kinds of schools. We have what we think of as the traditional public school, but these days there are also variations on that. There are magnet schools, and in about 42 states there are charter schools, which are also public, but they are operated by some kind of an educational management corporation that has special permission to try some different kinds of techniques. On the other hand, there are private schools. We're very familiar with church-related private schools, Catholic schools in Lexington, the Lexington Christian Academy, we're pretty familiar with. We're also familiar with independent private schools like Sayre and other private schools that kind of harken back to the old British notion of private schools. And then increasingly we've seen people gravitate toward homeschooling. Many of them for religious reasons, but some for other reasons. If they feel like, if a parent feels like they would be happier educating their own children in their own home. And unlike the early days of homeschooling, there's a whole lot more support for homeschool parents these days than was once the case. So think about, what's your dream job? What is the best match for your personality, your upbringing, your skills? Where would be the best place for you to teach? So your dream job might be working with preschool kids, with elementary, middle, high, or even higher ed students. Is your dream job in the city? When you think about it, do you see yourself in the suburbs? Or do you see yourself in a rural area? Do you see yourself teaching in a particular kind of school? The vast majority of you are likely to go on and teach in traditional public schools, but you might teach in a charter school. If you're in another state, you might choose to teach in a magnet school like my son does in Atlanta. Or you may think that you want to teach in a private independent school or even a private religious school. Have you thought about the nature of the kids that you want to work with? Kids of poverty, kids from affluent families, or a mix of both? All of those things come together to form the type of experience you're likely to have as a teacher. Well, what about job availability? We do have certain kinds of teachers that are in demand. According to the federal government, critical shortage areas in teaching for the year 2012-2013 are the areas included on this list. As is typical, we see the STEM areas, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, well represented among the shortage areas. As is also typical, if you plan to go into an area of special education, working with exceptional children, that's also a high demand area. And you can see world languages, English as a second language. Surprisingly, social studies in middle school made the list in the 2012-13 year, along with middle school mathematics and secondary mathematics. But that middle school social studies, I'll confess, was a surprise to me. And we have some traditional shortage areas, particularly in the elementary schools. Male teachers, teachers of color. So who would you imagine on this list would be in the greatest demand when it came time to hire? Well, probably it would be a high school biology teacher. But it all depends on where you're planning to teach. If you just happen to be in the right place at the right time when they're looking for a high school English teacher, you could get lucky. What about the different aspects of education? Teaching in the elementary school, for example, is a different kind of lifestyle than teaching in high school. In the elementary school, you're probably going to teach 6 or more subjects a day. And you'll teach those to essentially the same set of students. Probably you'll have a class somewhere between 20 to 28 students. And there's something about working with younger kids. They are generally more receptive to the idea of teaching. They are accepting of adults more. They haven't kind of become hardened, one might say. There are some tensions in teaching in elementary school. One of the issues that teachers have to deal with is the wide range of abilities that the students present, even in kindergarten, which is a surprising thing to think about. But we actually have we actually have students who enter kindergarten at the age of 5, 2 years behind already in school. How's that possible? Well, you've got one family that has the resources and the inclination to take their kids to a lot of places. They go to the library every week, or they visit some program or movie or show or event that comes to town. The parents take them with them when they travel, and kids have an opportunity to see much of the world and gain a much better perspective on the world than a child who, say, grows up in poverty, who hasn't been outside his neighborhood, who perhaps lives in a family where there's illiteracy or neglect, or even in some terrible cases where there's abuse that goes on in the home. Not exclusive to people with poverty, but we do tend to see that a little bit more in impoverished circumstances. So all of these things kind of come into play when it comes to what you're likely to experience as a teacher. It will depend on where you live, where you teach. So we have some students that come into kindergarten and they're behind, where one child has had several years of an academically based preschool program, and they sit down in class next to a child that hasn't been out of the city. And it's your job as a teacher to try to make sure that both of those children achieve the standards of your grade level by the end of the year. Also, elementary teachers have a much higher standard of care than do high school teachers. Because of their youth and vulnerability, their general developmental levels, youngest children, our most vulnerable children then, require teachers to take on most of the responsibility for keeping them safe. And that's a very high standard of care. That's different from teaching in the secondary school. Teachers in the secondary school typically will have 5 classes a day, but they'll specialize in a specific academic discipline. They also work in rigid blocks of time. And it's very different to work with adolescents. These are older students, many of whom have adult-sized problems. And children in their adolescence throughout high school have formed their personalities a lot more. They're less malleable than our younger children. So academic and behavioral habits become more difficult to change. Beyond teaching, there are other kinds of opportunities in the school that you'll want to keep in mind. Some of them require you to teach for a while before moving into those areas, particularly leadership and school administration. I spent 25 years as a school administrator, found it to be very rewarding. I liked the challenge. I liked the ability to run a school and work with a bunch of people and extend my ideas about what good teaching was to more than just my 25 kids. As a principal, you influence what happens in maybe 30 classes and in a whole neighborhood and community. In your average size elementary school, you're influencing to some degree or another maybe as many as 1,000 people. And a lot of folks find that to be very challenging and rewarding. So, and there are other forms of administration that occur at the district level as well. Curriculum coaches, typically staffed in the school, But then there are people like instructional supervisors and other directors and administrators who work in the education field that are typically located in the central office. Also in the school, we have guidance counselors, school psychologists and psychometrists, people that work with low incidence children, kids who need testing and who, for whom we're trying to diagnose educational problems and prescribe a better educational program for them. I mentioned curriculum coaches and deans of students that are school-based, speech therapy, folks that work with students that have communication disorders are also a school-based position, librarians, and increasingly we're seeing people in technology support. And if you think about what's happened to our libraries, you'll see there's a close connection there. Many of our librarians are becoming expert in resources that are available online. So, what is it to be a teacher? Well, we'll share a little poem with you called "Only the Brave Should Teach." Only those who love the young should teach. Teaching is a vocation. It is as sacred as the priesthood, as innate a desire, as inescapable as the genius which compels a great artist. If he has not the concern for humanity, the love of living creatures, the vision of the priest and the artist, he must not teach. That's from Pearl S. Buck. So the question is, are you up for the challenge? And if so, we certainly invite you to join us at Eastern and work your way through the the professional educator program here in our college. I think we will be able to show you the playing field, give you lots and lots of ideas about where you might best fit, and much of the coursework that you'll have as an undergraduate will be focused on very specific clinical practice skills that teachers need to be able to do and accomplish in their classrooms in order for our students to be successful. So I hope you'll join us if you feel like it's a good fit for you. If you don't, there's no shame in that either, but we're looking for good teachers.